Imagine being trapped in the mountains, snow falling non-stop for weeks, your food completely gone, no rescue coming, and the only way to survive might be the one thing you never thought possible. This is not a horror movie. This is a real story from American history. In 1846, a group of pioneers set out on a journey toward California. They were families, farmers, children, people chasing a dream of a better life in the West. But that dream would slowly turn into one of the most horrifying survival stories ever recorded. They became trapped deep in the mountains of Sierra Nevada, surrounded by snow so deep that escape was impossible. Months passed, snow so deep that escape was impossible. Food ran out, and what happened next shocked the entire nation. This is the true story of the Donner Party tragedy. During the 1840s, America was expanding rapidly. Thousands of people believed in something called manifest destiny, the idea that Americans were destined to settle the entire continent. The land in California promised opportunity, fertile farms, warm climate, a chance for a new life. For many families living in the eastern United States, it sounded like paradise. But getting there was incredibly dangerous. Travelers had to cross thousands of miles of wilderness. They faced deserts, rivers, mountains, disease, and starvation. Still, every year, thousands of pioneers joined long wagon trains. Among them were the families who would later become known as the Donner Party. In the spring of 1846, several families gathered in Illinois. Among them were two brothers, George Donner and Jacob Donner. Altogether, the group included about 87 pioneers. The wagon train moved slowly across the plains. Dust storms filled the air, and every mile meant moving farther from civilization. As the group traveled west, they heard about a supposed shortcut. A man named Lansford Hastings had written about a new route. He claimed this shortcut could save weeks of travel. It became known as the Hastings Cutoff. At first, the idea sounded perfect, but there was one big problem. Very few people had actually traveled this route before. Still, they decided to take the shortcut. The Hastings Cutoff quickly proved far more difficult. It led directly into dangerous terrain. The pioneers were forced to cut roads. Progress slowed to a crawl, and the group began falling behind schedule. The worst part of the journey was still waiting ahead. By the time the wagon train reached the mountains of Sierra Nevada, it was already late in the season. Snow had begun falling earlier than usual. The pioneers realized something terrifying. They might not reach California before winter. Still, they pushed forward. They believed that if they moved quickly, they could still make it. But nature had other plans. One night, a massive snowstorm struck the mountains. Snow piled higher and higher. Within days, the mountain passes were completely blocked. The wagon train was trapped, and there was no way out. With the road blocked by snow, the pioneers had no choice but to stop. They built small cabins near a frozen lake. That lake would later become known as Donner Lake. At first, they believed the storm would pass. They expected the snow to melt within a few days. But the storm didn't stop. More snow came, then more. Soon the snow was over 20 feet deep. The pioneers realized the horrifying truth. They were going to spend the entire winter trapped in the mountains. At first, the pioneers rationed their food carefully. They ate small portions each day. But winter in the mountains is long. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, their food supplies began disappearing. They hunted when they could, but animals were scarce in the deep snow. Soon, the pioneers were forced to eat their oxen, then their horses. When those were gone, they boiled animal hides for soup. Hunger became constant. Children cried from starvation. Adults grew weaker every day, and the cold never stopped. For the pioneers trapped in the snow, the nightmare was only beginning. Rescue might not come. The snow outside their small cabins had grown unbelievably deep. In some places, it reached more than 20 feet high. Trees disappeared beneath the white blanket. Trails vanished. Even moving a few hundred yards through the snow became exhausting. The pioneers were completely isolated. Inside the cabins, the situation grew worse each day. Food supplies were nearly gone. Eventually, there were no animals left. The pioneers began boiling animal hides for soup. They scraped bones for small bits of fat. Even leather belts were softened and eaten. Hunger continued to grow. Children cried through the night. Adults grew weak and thin. Some could barely stand. The harsh winter had turned their dream of California into a living nightmare. As conditions worsened, a small group made a desperate plan. If they stayed in the cabins, they would slowly starve. But if someone could reach California, rescue might be possible. It was an incredibly dangerous idea. The mountain passes were buried under massive amounts of snow. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Still, they had no choice. In December of 1846, a group of 15 people prepared for the impossible journey. This group would later become known as the Forlorn Hope. They built crude snowshoes from pieces of wood and animal hide. They gathered what little food remained, and then they stepped out into the frozen wilderness, because that's exactly what their journey was. A last, desperate hope. The travelers pushed slowly through the deep snow. Each step required enormous effort. The snowshoes helped, but progress was painfully slow. The group climbed steep mountain slopes and descended into frozen valleys. The wind howled through the trees. Snowstorms appeared without warning. Soon, their small supply of food ran out. Hunger returned with terrifying force. Days passed, then weeks. Members of the group grew weaker. Some collapsed in the snow, unable to continue. Others struggled forward, determined to survive. But the wilderness was merciless. One by one, members began to die. Eventually, the survivors reached a horrifying reality. They had no food left. Faced with starvation, they made a decision that would haunt American history forever. They began eating the bodies of those who had died. It was not a choice they wanted to make. It was survival. Without this act, none of them would have lived long enough to escape. Finally, after weeks in the wilderness, the survivors reached settlements in California. They carried with them a shocking story. Rescue had to come immediately. When news reached California, rescuers organized a mission. In February of 1847, the first rescue party entered the snowy mountains. The journey was extremely dangerous. The rescuers had to climb through deep snow and freezing temperatures to reach the trapped pioneers. Eventually, they arrived at the cabins near Donner Lake. What they found was heartbreaking. The settlers were starving. Many were too weak to walk. The rescuers brought food and prepared survivors, but there was one terrible problem. They could not take everyone at once. Some people would have to remain behind. Over the next several months, 3 more rescue parties attempted to reach the stranded settlers. Each journey was dangerous. Snowstorms constantly threatened the rescuers. Travel through the mountains was painfully slow, but each mission managed to save more survivors. Still, the winter continued claiming lives. Some settlers died from starvation, others from sickness. When the final rescue team arrived in the spring of 1847, they discovered the last survivors. Many had been forced to survive by eating the dead. It was the only way they could stay alive long enough to be rescued. The nightmare had finally come to an end. But the tragedy would never be forgotten. Out of the original group of pioneers who began the journey west in 1846, nearly half did not survive. Historians estimate that about 48 people died during the disaster. The rest were eventually rescued and brought safely to California. The story shocked the entire nation. Newspapers across America reported the horrifying details. People were stunned by the idea that ordinary families could be pushed to such desperate measures. The tragedy quickly became one of the darkest survival stories in American history. The story of the Donner Party is more than just a tragic event. It is a powerful reminder of how dangerous the journey west once was. In the 1800s, pioneers risked everything to build a new life. They faced deserts, mountains, disease, and starvation. Most survived. But some, like the Donner Party, faced unimaginable challenges. Their story shows the extreme limits of human survival. It reveals what people are capable of when pushed to the edge, and it reminds us that history is not just about victories and discoveries. Sometimes, it is about survival against impossible odds. Today, the peaceful waters of Donner Lake hide the memory of that terrible winter. Travelers pass through the mountains of Sierra Nevada without realizing what happened there nearly 2 centuries ago. But the story of the pioneers who became trapped in the snow remains one of the most chilling chapters in American history. Families chasing hope, a shortcut that led to disaster, and a winter that pushed ordinary people beyond the limits of human survival. The tragedy of the Donner Party will forever stand as a haunting reminder of the dangers of the American frontier and of the incredible will to survive, even in the darkest moments of history.